The room froze in a way that felt unnatural, like time itself had been startled into silence, because no one expected the truth to arrive wearing exhaustion, humility, and quiet dignity. Just moments earlier, laughter had filled the polished conference hall, sharp and careless, aimed at a man who smelled faintly of cleaning solution and carried the weight of the world in his shoulders. And then, with a calm strength that shook every mocking smile, a woman stepped forward and claimed him, not with anger, but with love, pride, and certainty, revealing that the janitor they had dismissed was the very man who had built her life beside her. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us never to judge a soul by appearances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach hearts around the world. David Carter had learned long ago how to become invisible. He moved through hallways quietly, pushing his cleaning cart like a shield, eyes lowered not from shame but from survival. Life had trained him to expect very little kindness from strangers, and even less understanding. Once, years ago, he had been a rising star in the corporate world, a systems engineer with ideas too bold for small rooms. But life has a way of collapsing dreams in a single night. When his wife, Emily Carter, had given birth to their daughter Lily, the joy had been overwhelming, but it was followed quickly by tragedy. Complications took Emily away just days later, leaving David holding a newborn and a future that suddenly felt impossible to carry. Grief hollowed him out. The job he loved demanded hours he could no longer give, focus he no longer had, and after too many missed deadlines and silent breakdowns in restroom stalls, he was let go with polite sympathy and forgettable words. Savings disappeared into diapers, hospital bills, and childcare costs. Pride dissolved into necessity. When the janitorial company offered him night shifts with flexible hours and health insurance, he accepted without hesitation, not because it matched his skills, but because it matched his devotion. Lily needed him alive, present, and strong, even when his heart felt anything but. Years passed in a blur of scraped knees, bedtime stories whispered through exhaustion, and early mornings that began before the sun. David became an expert at stretching meals, repairing broken toys, and hiding his tears in the quiet hours after Lily fell asleep. The uniform he wore to work erased his past in the eyes of others, and he let it. Being underestimated hurt less than being pitied. He found dignity in clean floors, in trash bins emptied before they overflowed, in knowing that his work mattered even if no one noticed. The corporate building where he worked sparkled with glass walls and ambition. Executives walked fast, talked louder than necessary, and rarely saw the people who kept their world functioning. David had cleaned those floors for nearly 3 years, memorizing schedules, avoiding meetings, and blending into the background like a shadow. But on that particular evening, everything changed. A high-level company event had run late, and David was instructed to wait until the meeting ended before finishing his work. He stood near the back of the large conference room, holding his cart, listening to laughter and self-congratulation echo against polished walls. The conversation turned careless, as it sometimes does when power forgets humility. Someone noticed him. The janitor. The single dad they had seen leaving early before. Words were spoken about ambition, about success, about how some people clearly never aimed high enough. The laughter came easily, thoughtlessly, and David felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the old instinct to shrink, to disappear. What none of them realized was that among the executives was Sarah Bennett, the newly appointed CEO, a woman whose rise had been swift, brilliant, and earned through relentless work. She had arrived late, unnoticed at first, listening quietly as she took in the room. Sarah had learned to read people long before she learned to lead companies. And when her eyes fell on David, standing stiffly at the edge of the room, something in her expression changed. Recognition washed over her face, followed by disbelief, then something deeper and fiercer. Sarah remembered David Carter not as a janitor, but as the man who had once stayed up all night helping her debug a failing system when she was an intern, the man who had encouraged her to speak up in rooms where she felt invisible, the man who had disappeared suddenly from the industry years ago. She had wondered what became of him. She never imagined this. As the laughter faded and the room waited for the next clever remark, Sarah stepped forward. Her heels echoed with purpose, each step carrying a truth no one was prepared to hear. When she spoke, her voice was steady, not raised, but powerful enough to cut through every assumption in the room. She identified David not by his uniform, but by his name, by his history, by the life they once dreamed of together before tragedy and time had reshaped them. She revealed that David Carter was her husband, the man who had supported her rise even while carrying his own private grief, the father who had sacrificed everything so his child could have stability. The silence that followed was absolute. Faces drained of color as realization settled in. The jokes turned heavy, collapsing under the weight of shame. David stood frozen, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sudden exposure of a life he had carefully kept hidden. Sarah looked at him with pride, not embarrassment, and in that moment, something inside him cracked open. The aftermath was swift and uncomfortable. Apologies stumbled over themselves. Offers were made, positions suggested, words rearranged in an attempt to undo what could not be taken back. David listened quietly, the way he always had, but something was different now. Lily's face flashed in his mind, her small hands clutching his at school drop-offs, her belief that her father could do anything. He realized then that invisibility had kept him safe, but it had also kept him small. In the days that followed, David was offered a role that matched his experience, flexible hours, and respect. He accepted not for pride, but for possibility. Life slowly shifted. Mornings were less rushed. Evenings held more laughter. Lily noticed the change before anyone else, sensing the lightness in her father's step, the way he smiled more freely. Sarah and David rebuilt what grief had paused, not as they once were, but stronger, tempered by loss and understanding. The story traveled through the building like a quiet lesson. People looked differently at the staff they once overlooked. Greetings became warmer. Gratitude more frequent. David continued to greet everyone the same way he always had, with kindness, because he knew how fragile dignity could be, and how powerful it was to protect it. Years later, when Lily stood on a stage receiving an award for leadership and compassion, she spoke of her father, not as a CEO's husband, not as a former janitor, but as the man who taught her that worth is not measured by titles, but by the love you give and the sacrifices you make when no one is watching. David watched from the audience, tears blurring his vision, knowing that every late night, every swallowed insult, every quiet act of love had led to this moment. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone who works quietly, loves fiercely, or carries more than the world ever sees, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive. And before the ending, tell us in the comments about a time you or someone you know was underestimated and proved the world wrong, because sometimes, the most powerful titles are the ones written in sacrifice, and the strongest people are those who keep going even when the room laughs, until one day, the room finally falls silent in awe.